The bullet whistled through the crisp autumn air of 1875, striking Katherine Hayes with such force that she stumbled backward into the alleyway behind Hawthorne's general store. Her hand clutched at her shoulder, warm blood seeping between her fingers as she slumped against the rough wooden wall. The secrets she'd uncovered about Judge Wilson's corrupt dealings with the silver mines weren't supposed to cost her life. But as darkness crept into the edges of her vision, Katherine wondered if the truth would die with her here in this dusty Nevada town. Miles Callahan heard the shot while tying his horse outside the saloon. Unlike most cowboys who minded their own business, Miles had never been able to ignore trouble. He sprinted toward the sound, hand hovering over the Colt revolver at his hip, dust kicking up from his worn leather boots. When he rounded the corner and saw the woman collapsed against the wall, her blue dress stained crimson, something inside him shifted. He'd seen plenty of violence in his 30 years, but the determined look in her eyes, even as life drained from her, struck him like nothing before. "Hold on, madam," he said, kneeling beside her. "Who did this to you?" Katherine's eyes fluttered. "Thompson's man. I found the ledger. Proves everything." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Miles ripped a strip of fabric from his bandana and pressed it firmly against her wound. "You're not dying today, not if I have anything to say about it." He scooped her into his arms, her body feeling impossibly fragile against his chest. "What's your name?" "Katherine Hayes," she managed through gritted teeth. "Newspaper." "Well, Miss Hayes, I'm Miles Callahan, and I reckon we've got quite a story ahead of us." He carried her quickly through the back streets of Hawthorne, avoiding main roads where Thompson's men might be watching. The town doctor had a reputation for loose lips, so Miles headed for the only place he trusted, the small cabin he kept at the edge of town. Few knew about it, which made it perfect for hiding a woman who clearly knew something that powerful men wanted buried. Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness as Miles laid her on his bed. He worked quickly, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made her cry out in pain despite her semi-conscious state. The bullet had gone through her shoulder, a lucky break, as it meant he wouldn't have to dig it out. He bandaged her as best he could with strips torn from a clean shirt. "You've got grit, Miss Hayes," he murmured as he worked, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. Most folks would have given up by now. Night fell as Miles kept vigil beside Katherine's bed. Her fever spiked, and he placed cool, damp cloths on her forehead. He'd seen enough gunshot wounds to know that infection was now the enemy. Throughout the night, he whispered encouragements, promises that she would live to tell whatever truth she'd uncovered. At dawn, Katherine's eyes opened, clear and focused for the first time since the shooting. She tried to sit up but winced and fell back against the pillows. "Easy there," Miles said, gently pressing her uninjured shoulder back down. "You're safe, but that bullet nearly took you to the promised land." Katherine studied him, her hazel eyes sharp despite her weakened state. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." Miles poured a cup of water and helped her drink before answering. "I've spent too many years watching bad men get away with worse things. Figure it was time to stand on the right side for once." Katherine's lips curved into a small smile. "Are you always this noble, Mr. Callahan?" "Miles," he corrected. "And no, madam. Most days I'm just trying to earn enough to keep my horse fed." He paused. "Now, when you're feeling up to it, I'd like to know what was worth putting a bullet in you." Katherine's expression darkened. "I'm a journalist, or trying to be. The Hawthorne Gazette wouldn't hire a woman reporter, so I've been working as a typesetter, but I've been investigating on my own." She took a shaky breath. "Judge Wilson and Sheriff Thompson have been taking bribes from the Silver Peak Mining Company. They've been forcing smallholders off their land, claiming eminent domain, then selling the mineral rights to the company." Miles whistled low. That's a dangerous story to chase, especially alone. It gets worse, Katherine said. 3 men have died in accidents after refusing to sell. I found a ledger in the judge's office that proves everything: payments, dates, names. Her voice caught. I was careless. Someone saw me. And now they think they've silenced you for good, Miles finished. He stood and paced the small cabin. They'll be looking for you and for that ledger. Where is it? Hidden inside the loose floorboard beneath my desk at the newspaper office, Katherine said. No one knows about it except. Her eyes widened with sudden alarm. My friend Eliza works there too, if they think she knows. Miles grabbed his hat. I'll check on her and get the ledger. You stay put and rest. No heroics. Wait, Katherine called as he reached the door. Why are you doing this? You could just walk away, forget you ever found me. Miles paused, his hand on the doorknob. My pa used to say there's doing what's easy and doing what's right. Never been much good at choosing easy. With that, he slipped out into the morning light. Hawthorne was already bustling despite the early hour. Miners headed to work, shopkeepers opening their doors, women hanging laundry in the cool morning air. Miles kept his head down, hat pulled low as he made his way to the newspaper office. The Hawthorne Gazette occupied a modest building on a side street, its windows already lit from within. Miles entered casually, the bell above the door announcing his presence. A young woman with blonde hair pinned severely at the nape of her neck looked up from a desk covered in papers. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Looking for a Miss Eliza," Miles said, keeping his voice conversational. "She a friend of Katherine Hayes?" The woman's face paled. "I haven't seen Katherine since yesterday afternoon. Who are you?" "Name's Callahan. I'm a friend," he said, then lowered his voice. "Katherine's been hurt. She's worried about you too." Eliza glanced around nervously before whispering. 2 men came looking for her last night, Thompson's deputies. They said she stole something from the judge's office. She hesitated. "Katherine's alive. They're saying she fled town." "She's alive, but won't stay that way if those men find her," Miles answered. He moved closer to Katherine's desk. "She mentioned something about papers hidden here." Understanding dawned in Eliza's eyes. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "No one's touched her desk." "I told them she'd been dismissed days ago." Miles crouched down, finding the loose floorboard Katherine had described. Inside was a leather-bound ledger and a stack of notes in Katherine's neat handwriting. He quickly tucked them inside his jacket. "I was never here," he said to Eliza. "And if anyone asks again about Katherine." "She left on the morning stage to Virginia City," Eliza finished. "Be careful, Mr. Callahan. These men, they don't play by any rules." "Neither do I when it counts," Miles replied. As he turned to leave, he added, "Might be best if you took a few days away yourself. Visit family, perhaps. I have a sister in Carson City," Eliza said, nodding in understanding. "Good. Go today if you can." Miles tipped his hat and left, walking unhurriedly despite the urgency he felt. Drawing attention now would only endanger Katherine further. When Miles returned to the cabin, he found Katherine sitting up in bed, her face pale but determined. She'd managed to wash her face and had combed her chestnut hair with her fingers, pulling it back into a loose braid. "Eliza?" she asked immediately, safe for now. "Sending her to her sister in Carson City," Miles answered, producing the ledger. "This what got you shot?" Katherine nodded, taking the book with her good hand. "This is everything. Names, amounts, dates, proof that Judge Wilson and Sheriff Thompson have been taking bribes to falsify land claims." She looked up at Miles. "But I don't know who to trust with it now. The territorial governor is friends with Wilson, and the federal marshal hasn't been seen in these parts for months." Miles set about making coffee on the small stove. "We need to get you somewhere safe first. Once Thompson realizes you're not dead, he'll turn this town upside down looking for you." "I'm not running," Katherine said firmly. "These people need to know what's happening. Families are losing their homes, their livelihoods. Some have lost their lives." Miles turned to face her, admiration and frustration warring in his expression. "You've got courage, Miss Hayes, I'll grant you that, but courage won't stop another bullet." "Then we need a plan," she insisted. "Something that exposes them publicly, where they can't deny it." Miles poured the coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "There's a territorial judge coming through next week for the quarterly circuit court. Judge Harmon. Known him for years, honest man, tough as old leather. If we can get this evidence to him." "A week is too long," Katherine argued. "Once they realize I'm alive and the ledger is missing, they'll destroy any other evidence." Miles handed her a mug, their fingers brushing briefly. "Then we need to move faster. Judge Harmon is likely in Reno now. We could reach him in 2 days hard riding." Katherine took a sip of the strong coffee. You think I'm letting you ride off alone with a gunshot wound and half the county wanting you dead?" Miles raised an eyebrow. "Besides, I started this dance. Might as well see it through." For the first time since he'd met her, Katherine smiled fully, transforming her face from merely pretty to strikingly beautiful. "Thank you, Miles." They spent the day preparing. Katherine's shoulder was stiff and painful, but the wound showed no signs of infection. Miles fashioned a sling to immobilize her arm and prepared supplies for the journey. They would leave at first light, using the cover of dawn to slip out of town unnoticed. As evening fell, Miles cooked a simple meal of beans and bacon. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in thought about the dangerous journey ahead. "Tell me about yourself," Katherine said suddenly. "Where are you from? How did you end up in Hawthorne?" Miles stared into his tin plate. "Not much to tell. Born in Missouri, family headed west when I was 10. Pa had gold fever. He never found his fortune, but he taught me to ride, shoot, and stand up for what's right." He paused. "Lost them both, Ma and Pa, to cholera when I was 17. Been drifting ever since, taking work where I can find it." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. Miles shrugged. "Life out here is hard. You learn to keep moving." He looked up at her. "What about you? Not many women choose to chase dangerous stories in mining towns." Katherine smiled ruefully. "My father was a newspaperman in Boston. He taught me everything about journalism, let me write for his paper under a pen name. When he died last year, his partner made it clear there was no place for a female reporter." Her eyes flashed with determination. "I decided if the East wasn't ready for me, I'd try my luck out west where everything is new. Turns out, some attitudes travel well." "Their loss," Miles said. "Anyone can see you've got more backbone than most men I know." Katherine laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the small cabin. "That's not usually considered a compliment for a lady." "Maybe that's the problem with most ladies," Miles replied with a small smile. "Not enough backbone." They fell into an easy conversation as night deepened around the cabin. Katherine spoke of her dreams to start her own newspaper someday, while Miles shared stories of his travels across the Western Territories. Despite the danger hanging over them, or perhaps because of it, the hours passed with surprising warmth. When Katherine finally retired to the bed, Miles made his place on a bedroll near the door, his revolver within easy reach. Sleep came fitfully, his senses alert for any sound that might signal approaching danger. Long before dawn, Miles woke Katherine. She dressed quickly in clothes he'd provided, trousers and a shirt that hung loosely on her slender frame, but would make riding easier with her injury. Over this, she wore her own coat to ward off the early morning chill. "Ever ridden astride before?" Miles asked as they slipped out to the small lean to where his horse was stabled alongside a second mount he'd procured the previous day. "My father believed women should know how to ride properly," Katherine answered, stroking the nose of the dun mare Miles had designated as hers. "Though I admit it's been some time." Miles helped her mount, mindful of her injured shoulder. Once she was settled, he swung up onto his own horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding. "We'll follow the old mining trail north, stays away from the main roads where Thompson's men might be watching." They rode out as the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, the only sounds the soft thud of hooves on dirt and the occasional call of an early waking bird. Miles led them along a narrow path that wound through scrubby pine and juniper, climbing steadily into the foothills east of town. By mid-morning, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Hawthorne. Katherine rode well despite her injury, though Miles noted the tightness around her mouth that betrayed her pain. "How are you holding up?" he asked during a brief stop to water the horses at a small stream. Katherine straightened from where she'd been splashing water on her face. "I'm fine," she insisted, though the pallor of her skin suggested otherwise. Miles regarded her skeptically. "No shame in admitting when something hurts, Miss Hayes." "Katherine," she corrected, "and I've endured worse." At his questioning look, she added with a wry smile, "You've never had to wear a corset in August heat." Miles chuckled, surprising himself. It had been a long time since he'd laughed genuinely. "Fair enough, Katherine, but we'll rest here a bit longer all the same." They continued their journey through the day, stopping occasionally to rest and eat from the provisions Miles had packed. The terrain grew rougher as they traveled northward, the path winding through rocky outcroppings and stands of pine. Miles kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings, aware that Thompson might have sent men to search the outlying areas. As dusk approached, Miles led them to a sheltered hollow beside a small spring. "We'll camp here for the night," he said, dismounting and helping Katherine down from her horse. She swayed slightly as her feet touched the ground, exhaustion evident in her posture. "You should have said you needed to stop sooner," Miles admonished gently, supporting her with a hand at her elbow. "And delay our journey," Katherine shook her head stubbornly. "Every hour counts." Miles set about making camp with practiced efficiency, building a small fire sheltered by rocks to minimize its visibility from a distance. He checked Katherine's wound, relieved to find it healing cleanly despite the day's exertions. As they ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Katherine pulled out the ledger. "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach Judge Harmon," she said. "This evidence is compelling, but Wilson and Thompson will deny everything. We need something more testimonies from people who have been wronged." Miles stared into the fire. "There's a man named Erickson who lost his claim last year. Good silver deposit on his land. He's working as a blacksmith in Reno now. Then there's the widowmaker's wife, Carl Miller. They called his death a mining accident, but everyone knew he'd refused to sell to Silver Peak just days before." "You know more than you've let on," Katherine observed. Miles shrugged. "I listen. People talk freely around a quiet cowboy." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Never had the evidence to do anything about it before." Katherine studied him in the firelight. "You're not what I expected, Miles Callahan." "And what did you expect?" "Most men I've met out here care about three things: gold, guns, and their next drink," she said candidly. Miles's mouth quirked. "I care about my horse too." Katherine laughed softly, then winced as the movement jarred her shoulder. Miles was immediately at her side, adjusting her sling. "You should rest," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. Having her so close unsettled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her scent, a mixture of soap and something distinctly feminine, clouded his thoughts. Katherine looked up at him, her hazel eyes reflecting the firelight. "Thank you, Miles, for everything." "Don't thank me yet," he replied, moving back to his side of the fire. "We've still got to get you to Reno in one piece." They settled for the night, Katherine wrapped in Miles's spare blanket while he kept first watch, his back against a tree and his rifle across his knees. The night was clear, stars scattered like silver dust across the dark canvas of sky. Miles found his gaze drifting to Katherine's sleeping form more often than the surrounding wilderness. Sometime after midnight, Katherine stirred and sat up. "Your turn to rest," she said softly. "I can keep watch for a while." Miles started to protest, but she cut him off. "I'm not helpless, Miles, and you can't protect me if you're exhausted tomorrow." Recognizing the logic in her words, Miles reluctantly handed her the rifle. "Wake me at the first sign of trouble." Katherine nodded, positioning herself against the same tree Miles had occupied. He settled onto his bedroll, surprised at how quickly sleep claimed him despite the hard ground and his concerns. He woke to Katherine's hand on his shoulder and the first light of dawn filtering through the trees. "No trouble," she reported. "Just an owl and some coyotes in the distance." They ate a quick breakfast and broke camp, leaving little evidence of their presence. The second day of travel took them through increasingly rugged country. Miles chose less traveled paths, wary of potential pursuers. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain. "There's an old line shack about an hour ahead," Miles said, eyeing the sky. "Used to belong to the Lazy S Ranch before they sold out. We can shelter there for the night." The rain began before they reached the shack, a steady downpour that soon had them both soaked to the skin. Katherine's face was drawn with pain and cold by the time the small wooden structure came into view. The shack was weathered but sound, its single room dusty but dry. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple furnishings, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot remained from its days as a herder's shelter. Miles quickly started a fire while Katherine stood shivering near the door. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said practically. "I'll step outside while you change into something dry." Katherine nodded gratefully, too cold to be concerned with propriety. Miles handed her his saddlebag, which contained a spare shirt, then stepped back into the rain to tend to the horses, securing them in the lean-to attached to the shack. When he returned, Katherine had changed into his shirt, which fell to her thighs. Her wet clothes hung near the fire and she sat on the cot, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders as it dried in the warmth. "Your turn," she said, averting her eyes as he retrieved dry clothes from his own pack. Miles changed quickly, hanging his wet garments beside hers. The small space felt suddenly intimate, the sound of rain on the roof and the crackling fire creating a cocoon around them. He busied himself preparing a meal from their supplies, aware of Katherine watching him from beneath her lashes. The silence between them had shifted, charged with something neither was ready to acknowledge. "Tell me about your dreams," Katherine said suddenly. "Beyond this, beyond Hawthorne and Judge Wilson and all of it. What does Miles Callahan want from life?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years, perhaps ever. He stirred the pot of beans thoughtfully, never given it much thought. Been surviving for so long, dreams seemed like a luxury. "Everyone has dreams," Katherine insisted, "even if they're buried deep." Miles considered this as he portioned the food onto tin plates. "Suppose I've thought about having land someday. A small ranch, nothing fancy. Enough horses to make a decent living." He passed her a plate, their fingers brushing momentarily. "What about you? Is running a newspaper the beginning and end of Katherine Hayes's ambitions?" Katherine smiled, tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "The newspaper is just the start." I want to tell stories that matter, that change things, like this one." She gestured to the ledger that never left her possession. "But I also want—" She hesitated, her expression softening. "A home, a family, things I thought I might have to sacrifice for my career." "Why would you have to choose?" Miles asked. Katherine laughed without humor. "Have you met many husbands who would allow their wives to chase dangerous stories? Or many women who manage to be both mothers and professionals?" "Can't say I have," Miles admitted. "But then, I haven't met many women like you either." Their eyes met across the small space, and something unspoken passed between them. Katherine looked away first, focusing on her food with sudden intensity. The rain continued through the night, drumming a steady rhythm on the wooden roof. Miles made a pallet on the floor, insisting Katherine take the cot. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him, his mind filled with thoughts of the woman breathing softly just feet away. Morning brought clearing skies and renewed purpose. They set out early, knowing they should reach Reno by nightfall if they maintained a steady pace. The air was fresh after the rain, the desert landscape briefly transformed by moisture, hints of green emerging from the usually dusty terrain. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, conversation flowing more easily between them. Katherine shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of a father who encouraged her curiosity, and a mother who despaired of ever making her into a proper lady. Miles spoke of his years on the frontier, the characters he'd met, the places he'd seen. By midday, the terrain began to change, the hills giving way to the more level approach to the Truckee Meadows where Reno lay nestled against the Sierra Nevada foothills. They stopped to rest the horses near a small creek, the city visible in the distance. "We're almost there," Katherine said, excitement and apprehension mingling in her voice. By this time tomorrow, Wilson and Thompson could be facing arrest. Miles nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Something's been bothering me. How did Thompson's men know you had the ledger? You said someone saw you, but who?" Katherine frowned. "I'm not sure. I was careful. The only person who knew I was investigating was—" She trailed off, her eyes widening. "Edward Jenkins, the Gazette's editor. I had to tell him something when I asked for time off to visit the courthouse archives." "Could he have informed on you?" Katherine shook her head slowly. "He's always been fair to me, even if he wouldn't let me write under my own name. But he and Judge Wilson serve on the town council together. Perhaps he mentioned my research innocently." "Or not so innocently," Miles muttered. "We need to be careful who we trust in Reno, too. Silver Peak mining has connections everywhere." They mounted up again, pushing forward with renewed caution. As they approached the outskirts of Reno, Miles led them on a circuitous route, avoiding main roads. The sun was setting when they finally reached the eastern edge of the growing city. "Judge Harmon usually stays at the Riverside Hotel when he's in town," Miles said as they rode through quieter streets. "But we can't just walk in there too exposed. I know a place we can stay tonight, figure out our next move." He guided them to a modest boarding house in a working-class neighborhood. The proprietress, a widow named Mrs. Donovan, greeted Miles with familiar warmth. "Mr. Callahan, it's been an age," she said, her Irish accent still strong despite decades in America. Her shrewd eyes took in Katherine's borrowed clothes and the sling on her arm. "And who might this be?" "My cousin Katherine," Miles lied smoothly. "She's had some trouble. We need a safe place to stay, Mrs. Donovan, just for a night or two." The older woman studied them both for a moment before nodding. "Room at the back, private entrance. $2 a night, meals included." "Thank you," Miles said, pressing the money into her hand. "And if anyone comes asking, never seen you before in my life, Mrs." Donovan finished with a wink. "Now come in before you catch your deaths." The room was small but clean, with a double bed that made both Miles and Katherine pause awkwardly at the threshold. "I'll sleep on the floor," Miles said quickly. "Mrs. Donovan brought them a simple but hearty dinner, along with a basin of hot water and clean towels. After she left, Katherine washed the trail dust from her face and hands while Miles outlined their plan. "I'll go to the Riverside Hotel first thing tomorrow, see if Judge Harmon has arrived. If he's there, I'll try to arrange a private meeting." He paced the small room. "We should also try to locate Erickson and Mrs. Miller, get their statements to support the ledger." Katherine nodded, suddenly looking exhausted now that they had reached relative safety. The strain of the journey and her healing wound had taken a toll. What if Thompson's men followed us to Reno? They'd have to know which direction we headed, and we had a good head start, Miles reassured her, though the concern had crossed his mind too. "Still, best if you stay here tomorrow while I make the arrangements. No sense taking unnecessary risks." Katherine looked as though she wanted to argue but was too tired to muster the energy. Instead, she nodded, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "Just for tomorrow. This is my story, Miles. I need to see it through." "Our story now," he corrected gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow could be a long day." True to his word, Miles made his bed on the floor, using his saddle as a pillow. Despite the hardness beneath him, he slept soundly, lulled by the knowledge that Katherine was safe beside him. He woke before dawn, dressing quietly to avoid disturbing Katherine. She stirred as he buckled on his gun belt. "Be careful," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Always am," he replied. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Mrs. Donovan." The streets of Reno were already coming to life as Miles made his way toward the center of town. The Riverside Hotel stood prominently near the bridge over the Truckee River, its 3 stories making it one of the tallest buildings in the young city. Miles entered the lobby, scanning for anyone who might be connected to Thompson or Silver Peak Mining. The clerk at the front desk was a young man Miles didn't recognize. "Morning," Miles greeted casually. "Is Judge Harmon staying here? Need to speak with him about a legal matter." The clerk checked his register. "Yes, sir. He arrived yesterday evening. He's taking breakfast in the dining room now if you'd like to wait." Miles thanked him and found a seat in the lobby with a clear view of both the dining room entrance and the front door. He didn't have to wait long before a tall, distinguished man with iron gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard emerged from the dining room. Judge Harmon had aged since Miles had last seen him, but his bearing was unmistakable, straight-backed and dignified, with keen blue eyes that missed little. Miles approached him directly. "Judge Harmon, Miles Callahan. We met some years back during the Davis Creek land dispute." Recognition dawned in the older man's eyes. "Callahan, yes. You were a witness in that case. What brings you to Reno?" Miles glanced around the lobby. "A matter of some delicacy and urgency, Your Honor. Is there somewhere we might speak privately?" Intrigued, Judge Harmon led Miles to a small meeting room off the main lobby. Once the door was closed, Miles explained the situation concisely, outlining Judge Wilson's corruption and the evidence Katherine had uncovered. Judge Harmon listened without interruption, his expression grave. When Miles finished, he said, "These are serious allegations, Mr. Callahan. Where is Miss Hayes now, and this ledger?" "In a safe location," Miles answered. "We were concerned about Silver Peak's influence reaching even here." Judge Harmon nodded thoughtfully. "A valid concern. The mining companies wield considerable power." He steepled his fingers. "I'm scheduled to leave for Hawthorne tomorrow to begin the circuit court session. This evidence should be presented formally, but given the circumstances." He paused. "Bring Miss Hayes and the ledger to my room this evening at 8. Room 302. We'll discuss how to proceed." Miles left the hotel feeling cautiously optimistic. His next stop was the blacksmith shop where Erickson now worked. The former miner was hammering a horseshoe when Miles entered, sweat glistening on his soot-stained face despite the cool morning. "Mr. Erickson." Miles approached the anvil. "Name's Callahan. I'd like to talk to you about your land claim in Hawthorne." Erickson's hammer paused mid-swing. Nothing to talk about, lost it fair and square according to the law. His bitter tone belied his words. "What if I told you that law was corrupt?" Miles asked quietly. "That Judge Wilson and Sheriff Thompson were taking bribes to seize your land." Erickson set down his hammer carefully, studying Miles with newfound interest. "I'd say that's a dangerous conversation to be having, mister." "More dangerous to let them keep doing it," Miles countered. "A friend of mine has proof. Judge Harmon is willing to hear the case, but we need witnesses, people willing to testify about what happened to them." For a long moment, Erickson was silent, conflict evident in his weathered face. Finally, he said, "Come back after closing, 6 o'clock. We'll talk then." Miles's next stop was harder to find. Clara Miller had moved to Reno after her husband's death, taking in washing to support herself and her young son. After several inquiries, Miles located her modest home near the edge of town. Mrs. Miller was hanging laundry in her small yard when Miles approached. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 25, with a careworn face that had once been pretty. A boy of about 4 played nearby with a wooden horse. "Mrs. Miller." Miles removed his hat respectfully. "I'm Miles Callahan. I'd like to talk to you about your husband, if I may." Wariness immediately replaced the polite curiosity in her eyes. "What about Carl?" "I believe his death wasn't an accident," Miles said gently, "and I think you might believe that too." Clara Miller glanced at her son, then back to Miles. "You'd better come inside, Mr. Callahan." The conversation with Mrs. Miller was difficult but productive. She'd harbored suspicions about her husband's death for over a year, especially after the mining company had quickly moved to purchase her husband's claim for a fraction of its worth, while she was still grieving. "Carl told me they'd offered to buy the land 3 times, she said, pouring Miles a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "The last time the man threatened him, said accidents happen in mines all the time." Her voice broke. 2 days later, he was dead. "Would you be willing to tell Judge Harmon what you've told me?" Miles asked. "It could help stop these men from hurting anyone else." Clara hesitated, looking at her son who was now napping in the corner. "What about Tommy, if I speak out?" "The judge will ensure your protection," Miles promised. "And I give you my word, I won't let any harm come to either of you." After further reassurance, Clara agreed to meet with Judge Harmon that evening. Miles left her house feeling a mixture of satisfaction and growing unease. The pieces were falling into place, but that also meant the danger to Katherine, and now to Erickson and Mrs. Miller, was increasing. He made one final stop at the telegraph office, sending a message to a friend in the U.S. Marshal's office in Carson City. If things went well with Judge Harmon, they'd need official support to make arrests in Hawthorne. It was mid-afternoon when Miles finally returned to the boarding house. Mrs. Donovan met him at the door, her expression worried. "There was a man asking questions earlier," she said in a low voice. "Didn't like the look of him. Said he was looking for a woman with a shoulder injury traveling with a cowboy." Miles tensed. "Did he see Katherine?" "No, told him I hadn't seen anyone fitting that description." Mrs. Donovan's eyes narrowed. "You in some kind of trouble, Mr. Callahan." "The kind that comes from doing the right thing," Miles answered. "We'll be gone by tonight, Mrs. Donovan. Don't want to bring trouble to your door." The older woman sniffed. "I've handled worse than nosy strangers in my time. You do what you need to do." Miles thanked her and hurried to the room where Katherine was waiting. She rose quickly as he entered, relief evident in her face. "I was getting worried," she said. "Did you find Judge Harmon?" Miles locked the door behind him before explaining everything he'd arranged. Katherine listened intently, her expression brightening with each development. "This is happening faster than I hoped," she said when he'd finished. "By tomorrow, we could have warrants issued for Wilson and Thompson." "If all goes well," Miles cautioned. "But Thompson's men are in Reno looking for us. We need to be careful tonight." Katherine nodded, her excitement tempered by the reminder of danger. "I've been reviewing my notes," she said, gesturing to papers spread across the bed, "making sure everything is organized for Judge Harmon. The ledger entries correspond with land seizures, with deaths." Her voice faltered. "With ruined lives." Miles sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her body. "What you're doing takes courage. Most people would have walked away, especially after being shot." Katherine looked up at him, her hazel eyes serious. "I couldn't walk away, not once I knew the truth." She paused. "What about you? After tonight, after we meet with the judge, will you walk away?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond its simple words. Miles found himself studying the curve of her cheek, the determined set of her chin, the intelligence in her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "Not until I know you're safe. And after that," she pressed. Miles took a deep breath. "After that?" "I reckon that depends on whether a lady journalist might have room in her life for a dusty cowboy." A slow smile spread across Katherine's face, lighting her eyes. "I think she just might." The moment stretched between them, the air thick with unspoken feelings. Miles leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Katherine met him halfway, her lips soft and warm against his. The kiss was gentle at first, mindful of her injury, but deepened as Katherine's good arm came up to encircle his neck. When they finally broke apart, Miles rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since I found you in that alley," he admitted. Katherine laughed softly. "Even covered in blood and half-conscious." "Even then," he confirmed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "There was something in your eyes, a fire that wouldn't go out." They reluctantly separated as the clock ticked closer to their meeting with Judge Harmon. Katherine changed back into her own clothes, which Mrs. Donovan had kindly laundered. Miles helped her adjust the sling for her injured arm, his touch lingering longer than strictly necessary. As dusk fell, they prepared to leave for the Riverside Hotel. Miles checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded. "Stay close to me," he instructed. "If anything seems wrong, we leave immediately. The evidence isn't worth your life." "It might be worth others' lives," Katherine countered, tucking the ledger securely inside her coat. "If we don't stop them, how many more Carl Millers will there be?" They left through the back entrance, Miles leading them along side streets and alleyways to avoid main thoroughfares where they might be spotted. The Riverside Hotel loomed ahead, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering darkness. Miles scanned the street carefully before they crossed to the hotel. "We'll use the side entrance," he murmured. "Less visible." They slipped into the hotel and climbed the stairs to the third floor. The corridor was empty as they approached room 302. Miles knocked softly in the pattern he'd arranged with Judge Harmon earlier. The door opened to reveal not only Judge Harmon, but also Erickson and Clara Miller. The judge gestured them inside quickly, closing and locking the door behind them. "Miss Hayes," Judge Harmon greeted Katherine with a respectful nod. "I've heard much about your courage. These good people have been sharing their experiences with me." Introductions were made, and Katherine presented the ledger and her notes to Judge Harmon, who examined them with growing concern. "This evidence is damning," he said eventually. "Combined with the testimonies here, I believe we have sufficient cause to issue warrants for Judge Wilson, Sheriff Thompson, and several officials from Silver Peak Mining." Katherine exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "When can you act on this?" "I've already sent for U.S. Marshal Preston," Judge Harmon replied. "He should arrive from Carson City by morning. We'll proceed to Hawthorne together, where I'll convene a special grand jury." "What about in the meantime?" Miles asked. "If Thompson's men are already in Reno looking for Katherine." "I've arranged rooms here for all of you," Judge Harmon said, "under my personal protection. The hotel staff are discreet, and I've stationed a trusted deputy outside this door." The discussion continued late into the evening as they prepared their case. Katherine's journalistic instincts served her well, as she helped organize the evidence and testimonies into a compelling narrative of corruption and abuse of power. Miles watched her work with undisguised admiration, impressed by her sharp mind and unwavering focus despite her injury. When the meeting finally concluded, Judge Harmon escorted Mrs. Miller to her room first, then Erickson. Miles and Katherine were given a room down the hall, with instructions to remain there until morning when Marshal Preston would arrive. Their room was more luxurious than the boarding house, with a large four-poster bed and elegant furnishings. Katherine sank into an upholstered chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that their immediate goal had been accomplished. "We did it," she said softly. "Or at least, we've started it." Miles knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "You did it. I just helped along the way." Katherine shook her head. "I wouldn't be alive without you, Miles. This wouldn't be happening." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Try to rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Katherine's eyes searched his face. "What happens after tomorrow, Miles?" "After Hawthorne and the arrests and all of it," Miles smiled slowly. "I was thinking I might need to stay in Hawthorne a while. Here there might be a newspaper needing stories about the biggest scandal in the territory." "Is that so?" Katherine's lips curved upward. "And where would this cowboy reporter stay while writing these stories?" "Well, madam," Miles drawled, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "I reckon that depends on whether a certain lady editor might have room for him." "I think that could be arranged," Katherine murmured as Miles leaned in to kiss her again. Morning brought Marshal Preston, a stoic, capable man who reviewed their evidence with professional thoroughness before declaring it sufficient for immediate action. By noon, they were on a train bound for Hawthorne, the marshal's deputies providing security for the witnesses. Katherine sat beside Miles, watching the landscape roll past the window. "Are you nervous?" she asked quietly. Miles considered the question. "Not about Thompson and Wilson. Justice has been a long time coming for them." He looked at her, his expression softening. "More nervous about what comes after. Been on my own a long while. Not sure I remember how to be anything else." Katherine's hand found his between them. "We'll figure it out together," she promised. The return to Hawthorne brought a flurry of activity. Marshal Preston moved swiftly, arresting Sheriff Thompson at his office without incident. Judge Wilson attempted to flee, but was apprehended at the edge of town. Officials from Silver Peak Mining were served with warrants, and the company's offices were sealed pending investigation. Judge Harmon convened the special grand jury as promised, with Katherine as the star witness. She testified clearly and compellingly, presenting the ledger and explaining how she had discovered the corruption. Erickson and Mrs. Miller added their personal experiences, painting a picture of systemic abuse that had affected dozens of families. Throughout the proceedings, Miles remained close to Katherine, his steady presence a source of strength when testifying became difficult. The grand jury took less than a day to return indictments against all parties involved. As word spread through Hawthorne, other victims came forward with their stories. The Hawthorne Gazette, under new editorial direction after Jenkins was implicated in the cover-up, published Katherine's account of the corruption and her narrow escape from death. Her byline, Katherine Hayes, special correspondent, appeared prominently on the front page. In the weeks that followed, Katherine became something of a local hero. The newspaper offered her a permanent position as a reporter, with the freedom to write under her own name. She accepted, with one condition, that they also hire a new writer to cover stories from the perspective of ordinary working people. Miles Callahan's first article, a piece about the struggles of small ranchers against corporate interests, appeared the following week. As autumn turned to winter, Katherine's shoulder healed completely. She and Miles settled into a rhythm, sharing her small house near the newspaper office. Their relationship deepened as they worked together and apart, each respecting the other's independence while finding joy in their partnership. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after the bullet that had nearly ended her life, Miles took Katherine for a ride outside town. The air was crisp and clear, the mountains in the distance capped with snow. He reined his horse to a stop near a ridge overlooking a small valley. "What do you think of this piece of land?" he asked, gesturing to the valley below. Katherine looked around, admiring the sheltered location with its small creek and stands of pine. "It's beautiful." "Why?" Miles dismounted and helped her down from her horse. "I bought it," he said simply. "Thought it might make a good place for a small ranch, and maybe—" He reached into his pocket, producing a small box, a home. Katherine's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "Miles." "I love you, Katherine Hayes," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness she could see in his eyes. "You're the bravest, smartest, most stubborn woman I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Tears filled Katherine's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Miles slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion he'd once kept carefully guarded. When they finally broke apart, Katherine laughed softly. "You know, when I came west to make my name as a journalist, I never imagined finding love in the process. And when I pulled a half-dead woman from an alleyway, I never imagined she'd change my life," Miles countered, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. "Guess we both got more than we bargained for." They were married in the spring of 1876, a simple ceremony attended by friends including Mrs. Miller and her son, Erickson and his family, and Judge Harmon, who came from Reno especially for the occasion. Eliza served as Katherine's maid of honor, having returned to Hawthorne once the danger had passed. The story of corruption in Hawthorne made headlines across the territory and beyond. Katherine's reporting earned recognition from newspapers in San Francisco and even back east. Job offers came from larger publications, but she declined them all, content with the life and work she'd built in Hawthorne. Together, she and Miles built their home in the valley he'd purchased, a comfortable house with a study where Katherine wrote her articles, and Miles worked on the novel he'd secretly begun. Their small ranch prospered, though neither gave up their newspaper work, believing in the power of truth to create change. 2 years after their wedding, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after Miles's father. He was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, who inherited her mother's fiery determination and her father's quiet strength. On warm evenings, Miles and Katherine would sit on their porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes Katherine would touch the small scar on her shoulder, a permanent reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything before she'd even found it. "You ever regret it?" Miles asked her once, noticing the gesture. "Getting shot for knowing too much?" Katherine smiled, taking his hand in hers. "Never. That bullet led me to you, to this life." She looked out at their children, their home, the life they'd built together. "Some truths are worth risking everything for," Miles nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "And some are worth making sure you live to tell everyone," he added, completing the thought that had defined their journey from strangers to partners, from danger to safety, from solitude to family. As twilight deepened around them, Katherine rested her head on Miles's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the truth had not only set her free, but had given her a love and a life far richer than she could have imagined. That fateful day in Hawthorne, when a bullet meant to silence her, had instead begun the most important story of her life.